Our next reader is Tasha Cotter. She's the author of poetry collections Some Churches, That Bird Your Heart, and The Girl in the Cave. Tasha is the winner of the 2015 Delphi Poetry Series. Her work has appeared in numerous journals. She has contributed to Women in Clothes, the Poets on Growth Anthology, and the 2007 Poets Market. Currently, she's working on her second full-length collection of poetry. Please welcome Tasha Cotter.
Hi, you all. Thank you so much for having me today. It's an honor to be here to share my work with you all. I thought what I'd do is take you through a journey of my own work. So what I'll do is start with some poems that came out in my first full-length collection of poetry, Some Churches. This book came out in 2013. It's on sale today. All my books are on sale for $10, so if you hear something you like, come find me and I'll get you a book. So I'm going to start with the title poem. And for this book, I kind of drew on some life experiences, getting through my 20s, relationships. This first poem I'm going to read, Some Churches, I drew on a place from the Center College campus that I really loved. There was a church on the campus, and there was like a maze of contemplation. There was an actual maze of contemplation. And that memory of that place, the idea of a maze of contemplation, it stuck with me, and it found its way into this poem. So I'm going to start with Some Churches. That winter, when I got to the maze, I knew I was too late. It was the empty, uncurled air that announced I'd missed you. And then I noticed the pilgrims, already working their way out of the crumbling stone, noting every footstep, cataloging every choice, moan by moan. The church said, "Come in," but I didn't. "Sit down," said the one bench, but I couldn't. On Sunday, I came from nothing and in stillness held an assembly. I waited as the day collected more until it collected frost. I watched the men and women winter dance in and out of wrong. Walking one way, they only find a wall. Their measured footsteps hemming me in this imperial contest, offering a maze of contemplation. No one saw the dozen roses I laid at the feet of everyone taking steps to save themselves. And this next poem I'm going to read is a prose poem. So I studied English literature and French at the University of Kentucky. As I was studying French along the way, I discovered the prose poetry form, and I really, really started to love it. I probably read as much fiction as I do poetry. I'm a storyteller. You'll find that a lot of my poems are free verse, narrative-driven, lyrical poems. This next poem I'm going to read is a prose poem. It's called Unrequited Love. They are in a very large pool of water, and the man is standing in the shallow end. It doesn't even reach his hips. He watches the woman at the other end of the pool. She's kicking her legs to stay afloat, her head bobbing up and down, trying to catch her breath. The whole time she's smiling, shouting to him that she's fine. He keeps standing there, and she wonders why he doesn't save her, or at least help her out of the deepest part. And so what I think I'm going to do is read the very last poem in this book. I studied at the Bluegrass Writer Studio, and while I was a student, I tended to take classes in fiction, poetry, and nonfiction. I was actually just speaking to somebody about that earlier. I'd always written poetry in undergrad, but it was while I was getting my master's that I started venturing into some other forms. This poem came out of the experience of working on a novel. It's the last poem in my book. It's called The First Time Novelist. I want to read the story before it's done. I want to be the reader, the empty hands, asking for your story, which is the same story as mine. I refuse to write the end. I take the long way home, going from scene to scene, mouthing the dialogue, tasting the fairy tale. I return to where it all began. I look around, and once upon a time, I fall into my story. I wake up on the page and see you at sunset, on the bench where I last saw you. Is this the end? Is this the shape of my final chapter? A large clock hangs in the air. We both see it. I look at you and the noise of it gets louder. I can't hear you, so I watch your mouth, and for the first time I see why you're back. You've come to make me right. The end. So that's this book, you all. Thank you. And what I think I'm going to do next is read a couple poems from this collection that came out with Blue Lyra Press. This is actually a book that contains 3 chapbooks. I have a chapbook in here. It's called Torch. I'm in here with 2 other poets, Jennifer Litt and Joy Layden. It's a really interesting idea for a book. I'm going to read a couple of my poems. This poem I'm going to start with is called Arrowhead. It was kind of inspired by growing up on a big farm in south central Kentucky. Always found arrowheads on the property. And so I'm noticing in my work I'm starting to go back into the southeastern landscape, natural history, local legends. So this book contains some of those poems that I'm starting to find my way into. Arrowhead. To understand the word enemy, imagine the buffalo grazing while listening for the stir of men approaching the hill, sharpened flint in their palms, each of them ready to die for the same thing, the hush of a limestone cave, the rise and fall of sinking creeks. You can almost understand killing for your home because it's a place that claims you and calls you back. But what about the arrowhead? Instrument in hand, the buffalo never stood a chance. Tiny monster, just when you think you know what to expect, there lies the incredible surprise, waiting for you to cross its path. So that's Arrowhead. The last poem I'm going to read from this book is a poem called Thanksgiving. And again, it was inspired by the southeastern landscape, by family, by relationships. Thanksgiving. Everyone asked, but I couldn't tell them that even the colors of the walls had changed. Winter magnolia to a garnet dust. And he had liked this change so much, he bought more land, the rest of it in the county, and laid a new thick layer of carpeting underfoot. No one would say, what would happen to the rest of us? He sold the trees for timber and was spotted on his tractor every afternoon. The season swept their separation into a cool ravine. He worked it all away, thistles blitzing the air, cut free by the blade of the scythe. As the season tucked itself into fall, the lawns ambering, pumpkins the color of a butternut, I watched him from the kitchen window, ambling past, a row of wire tucked under the arm. It was a disappearance of the past, or was it a tightening on what was left? A copper scrubber taken to everything, the promise intrinsic to a paintbrush. But what desperation I felt, wallpapering the house in sea air and silk. Everything needed a reappointment. We all needed to come clean. And so what I think I'm going to do is read from some of my very newest work. This chapbook came out in November, Girl in the Cave. What I'm currently at work on is a second full-length collection of poetry that orbits around the southeastern landscape, the natural history, local legends. So this chapbook begins to detail some of those poems and explore some of those themes that I'm getting more and more curious about the more reading and research I do. So I'm going to read a couple poems from this book. This one is a prose poem, another prose poem for you all, and it's called The Pond. They separated, and it became necessary to open the closet that held all my childhood things. Boxes were splitting open, some sunken and faded from heat. Some of the boxes had names. Mostly they weren't identified in any way. All my things would have to be stored somewhere else. My mother sat behind me with a large black trash bag, waiting for me to hand her things not worth keeping. I reached into the closet, pulling out cigar boxes of notes, letters, sketchbooks. There were tinier things that I thought would keep. I found my old collection of erasers I'd stored in a lunchbox. The erasers had melted into a putty-like mess. "The eraser of all erasers," she whispered. Then she began talking about the year Dad had drained the pond in order to fill it up again because he wanted to stock it with catfish. I remembered the heat from that summer and the enormous job it had been, the trench that had been dug, and how the pond had drained itself, slowly at first, then all at once. The smell of decay and sediment filled the air by dusk. I was small, but I had helped him trudge through the mud and drain what water was left. I could only stare as the water rushed away, pooling in the fields at sunset. And this last poem is a tiny poem in this collection. It's called Dormant. Will I ever be the last blade blowing in mindless winter? Not interested in a rumored season, because I know how to be alone, listening to the slate blue air and its difficult breathing. Life be more like the bulb, which loves the steadfastness of the moon. Thank you all. So does anybody have any questions or any follow-up at all?
How old were you when you began writing?
It started with a love of reading. So I grew up on a big farm in South Central Kentucky, pretty far away from anybody I went to school with. So I tended to turn to books and the outdoors. It started with reading and progressed to me one day being gifted a nice notebook that I just started jotting down quotes, things I overheard, words I liked, and then I just started tinkering with words.
And how old were you approximately?
Probably 10 to 12, I guess. Yeah.
So,
But I just always knew that I wanted to be a writer. But I'm mostly a reader and occasional writer. So, yeah.
there's plenty of time.
Any other questions, you all?
Can you talk a little bit about your process, like from the written poetry to the publishing the books? Like,
Yeah, so basically, I tend to do, I don't write as much as I used to, but I think what has to happen is for you to find a way to continually write, and from that you start to build a collection that has some kind of thematic unity.
okay.
Like my collection, my chapbook, Girl in the Cave. What I knew I wanted to do and what I was seeing in a lot of my work was this theme of the southeastern landscape and also how the landscape has played a part in certain memories. What I tend to do is take a bit of truth and spin it a little bit to make it work for the kind of poem I'm going for, what I want to convey. So what I had to do was figure out, well, what of what I've written fits along with that theme?
Mm-hmm.
What makes sense for a collection, whether it's chapbook length or full-length collection. So for me, chapbooks, they're a way of figuring out what the next book is going to be.
So,
That's how it's been for me so far.
so like notes.
Yeah, right. But I'm always looking for a collection that makes sense together. It's got to have some kind of, not exactly narrative arc,
Right.
but it's got to somehow relate to each other and inform the other poems around it. That's kind of what I'm shooting for. But again, the full-length collection I'm working on right now is about the Southeast, the Mammoth Cave National Park area, the Carolinas. So the more reading and research I started to do about Mammoth Cave, the more interesting it became. You know, it was in my own backyard when I was growing up, so I was not that interested. You know, I was interested in everything but what was around me. But being away from that landscape now, where I live in Lexington versus the Glasgow, Bowling Green area, it's kind of made me curious about the history of that area. You know, I know what it was like 10 years ago, but what was it like 150 years ago? What was it like before it was a national park? How was it used? By whom was using it? So I started exploring those questions and exploring that idea in a longer form work, and so that's what I've been working on. Yeah. That's a good question. Another question, you guys? Yeah.
So, have you found yourself going back and hiking the farm or driving through the landscape while working on this book, or have you mainly relied on memory and photographs and
Mainly memory and photographs. Some of my family still lives in that area. I live in Lexington. My husband's family is from eastern Kentucky. So I have found that area interesting too, because it's similar in some ways to the South Central landscape, but it's very different too in terms of culture in the mountains. But what it's caused me to do is read about what did people know of that area? What were some of the stories? What were some of the legends that people heard about? So it's primarily me going to libraries, researching. I work at the University of Kentucky. We have a great library system, so I tend to put books on reserve. I'm at the Lexington Library about every weekend. I just try to read widely. And sometimes it's very different kinds of ideas that find themselves into the same poem. You writers and readers probably get this, but the strangest things make a poem fit together as a whole. Like when I was writing that poem, Thanksgiving, with the winter garnet, some of those ideas and the colors, it's me looking at paints, the color of paints. Going to places like hardware stores, what kind of colors, what kind of sounds fit together to make that poem feel unified. So I'm a poet that also focuses really keenly on sound and the sonic qualities that I'm going for. Yeah.
No, 5 minutes.
Okay.
That's all.
so in terms of the legends that you're working with, are they largely legends about the land? Are they legends that connect back to the country / ethnic groups of the immigrants that came in the early years of Kentucky? Where are your legends coming from?
Primarily some of the experiences of Daniel Boone, and also when you're thinking about Mammoth Cave National Park, what was it like before it was a national park? People hunted on that land. People got lost in those caves. Some people died in those caves.
Yeah.
Why did those things happen? What was that atmosphere like? So I'm exploring things you can read about in books, but I'm also trying to project my own experiences and my own kind of human reactions to what some of those experiences might be like, to make some of those experiences come across on the page and kind of leap out. I like telling stories, and so I'll start with a grain of truth, and I'll kind of spin it to make the poem have that emotional truth, because I think when you're just writing direct, it can lose some of that artistic quality and that artistic merit we're all shooting for. Any other questions, you guys? All right, well, come find me over there.
Thank you.
Thanks.